biography and as a microcosm of a theory of social change. And so I ran into Helen yesterday and we talked about what a great movie this might make. And she suggested that Cate Blanchett should play her. So I think after I am in the category of people who thought it wise to scrap the speech after listening yesterday to a sort of unrelenting story of gloom and doom, and then a little more today. So I want to actually change the subject a little bit to talk, I will talk about gloomy stuff, but I want to talk about the politics of nuclear strategy. We haven't talked very much about the politics that prevent the change of narrative that have taken us to the moment where we are today, standing up here in a relatively depressed state of mind, because nothing really has changed. So I've been at this topic for more decades than I really want to count, watching the eternal resilience of the status quo around the paradigm that we call nuclear deterrence, which was discussed a little bit this morning, or touched on in the context of the recent UN meeting on the humanitarian consequences. Why is it, or how is it, that we went, and particularly in this latest episode, from the Prague speech, the famous op-ed written by the Four Horsemen, the so-called Four Horsemen, Henry Kissinger, Sam Nunn, Bill Perry, former Secretary of State Schultz, calling for the elimination of nuclear weapons. In 2007, in an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, which has a reputation for having the most conservative op-eds. Helen, you missed my compliments. Yeah, okay, well, I'll be sure to repeat them. How we could go from this sort of seminal moment of the four probably most conservative and certainly most expert leaders of the defense establishment calling for the elimination of nuclear weapons, followed by the endorsement of that goal by the new and extremely popular president, to, once again, the reification of the deterrence paradigm, the triad, the sanctity of a triad, prompt counterforce, and all the other issues that we have talked about in the last day and a half. I'm changing the subject to talk about this because the theory of change and efforts to change how people think has to do with the correlation of forces on the ground, and even though there's been a lot of condemnation of Washington, you need people in Washington working for common objectives. Different tactics, common objectives, coalition building, and all kinds of things that have to do with power. And power isn't one of the topics that sits all that well, in my experience, inside the peace movement. The peace movement likes to talk about morality. It likes to talk about the high ground, talk about idealism. And often pragmatism and working with the levers of power is not the most popular topic, but it's extremely important. So let me just go through a few points about how we got from that high point in 2007 to where we are today, and then conclude with a few comments about where we might go from here. There was this moment that should still be with us of military logic, that nuclear weapons had outlived any utility that they could possibly have had, including for the large powers. In the logic of the Four Horsemen and the logic of Prague, there wasn't just a high-minded or moral condemnation of nuclear weapons. This was hardcore military logic. The United States, having achieved the preeminent conventional capability by orders of magnitude relative to any other country, spending as much on its own military budget as all countries combined behind it, the Four Horsemen saw in that situation, in the immediate post-Cold War, that the only thing that could threaten that preeminence would be small countries seeking to acquire unconventional weapons, so-called weapons of mass destruction, including and especially nuclear weapons. the only thing that could thwart the decisive advantage accorded to the force projection of the United States, in other words, would be a backlash against the perception of American superiority. And I would go further in defense, particularly of one of the members, Bill Perry, who understood that the perception of the lack of legitimacy of the use of force by the United States would be particularly provocative and encourage countries, other countries, to seek ways to thwart American power. Prophetic words, which began in work that I actually participated in working with Bill Perry in the early 1990s, under the rubric of cooperative security. There was a lot of optimism about a very different world after the end of the Cold War. But that said, there is still also a very strong military, pragmatic component to this thinking. The revolution in military affairs, the reconnaissance strike complex, as the Soviets used to call American technological superiority, that Gorbachev recognized to be inherent inside the Strategic Defense Initiative, had pushed forward a new concept that could replace nuclear deterrence. Now, I'm not talking to I'm talking to the sort of internal logic that had the opportunity to start shifting the thinking inside the Pentagon and inside the planning community, and had a great deal of support with the military. So what happened? What was interesting to watch, in terms of interesting in the sense of a slow-moving car accident, and by the way, this wasn't the first time. The nuclear freeze movement had, brought us to the, much closer to the brink of at least discussion of the repudiation of nuclear weapons. This was a moment where the centerpiece of power was talking about the growing disutility of nuclear weapons in American strategy as well as globally, as well as seeing a basic question about the legitimacy of the whole. But, so what went wrong? There's, in the literature of nuclear strategy, a common understanding of the difference between so-called declaratory policy and operational policy. And that is just a way of formally recognizing that politicians, including presidents, will talk about what they would like to do, particularly in the nuclear area, and what happens at the operational level, meaning the planning level, where the people who are charged with putting together, in the nuclear case, what are warfighting plans that match targets, weapons to targets, targets to weapons, to actually execute these war plans in the event that deterrence fails. The disconnect between the declaratory and operational has only grown more pronounced, certainly in my lifetime and including in these recent years. So for all the welcoming and positive aspects of Global Zero, of the pledge for elimination, of the Prague speech, very little work was done to translate this rhetoric into actual alterations in the operational plans that underlie the concept and the realities of deterrence. Hans Christensen laid this out as graphically as you can imagine. So this reality is the result of political action, or inaction in this case, and it is part of a very long history of presidents trying to put their imprint on nuclear policy at the beginning of an administration and then turning to other things. There's I have written extensively about the sort of sad history of, I think, actually Hans touched on this, of what happens when the new candidate, the new president, commander-in-chief is briefed on the content of the, used to be called the Single Integrated Operational Plan, which is the large plan for the execution of nuclear weapons in war. Those sobering moments when the candidate is transformed into the commander-in-chief and realizes that they have the sole responsibility for deciding the fate of the earth. It's a sobering moment because you realize how really embedded this highly resilient structure is, and how complicated it has become, and how much really out of the control of political authorities. Not because it's immutably that way, but because no president ever has spent the time to really to understand fully what's inside those plans or to change their direction. I mean, ironically, the one president who did at a moment of maximum opportunity was the first George Bush, because of the breakup of the Soviet Union. It was actually, of all people, Cheney, who got the first briefing about the content of the PSYOP after the Soviet Union had broken up, and realized that we had weapons targeted all over places that were becoming our new friends. A few, like 50 MX missiles over Poland was considered a limited option. So, as had happened to President Clinton and has since happened to President Obama, you find the enduring disconnect between political aspiration and operational reality to serve as a drag on the system and leave you with the kind of highly resilient momentum of planning that leaves you with this legacy of intense dedication to the modernization of the triad, of new concepts, of smaller weapons potentially, all of which add up to the continued quest that goes back to the Manhattan Project of trying to think of how to harness the lethality of atomic and nuclear weapons for actual credible use on the battlefield.
Could you speak into the mic?
Yes, I can speak into the mic. Are you Mr. Mike? Okay, gotcha. Completely knocked me off course here. So let me just say a few things about the future and what I think we're up against and have not yet been said. Why are we back to kind of where we started with all the promise? And at the heart of this is the concept of deterrence. The deterrence concept is an extremely compelling narrative for capturing a form of public consensus, or at least acquiescence, that this crowd has not gotten. There is no compelling narrative coming out of this movement or about people who care about this issue. Deterrence is an infinitely open-ended concept. It is intrinsically sounds good. There is nothing, why would you not want to deter war? Underneath this concept, if a little deterrence is good, more is better. Why not? We actually have no operational definition of what deterrence is. What do you have to hold at risk? For what purpose? Under what circumstances? With what weapons? We have never had that debate as a nation. And so as such, and again, to go back to the political oversight, unless presidents and political authorities are paying attention, we really don't know what that deterrence concept means, but it's a great narrative, and it's a lot better narrative than, say, zero. At least we have to work on zero. It's not the best. This isn't kind of an invocation to the future of working with people who know something about communications, who know something about appealing to broader publics, who know something about speaking to Americans about these issues, so that we are not, and I blame all of us as the sort of nuclear experts, are not these unbelievably boring wonks who don't know how to speak to people who think that they have to be super expert in order to have a view about what the nuclear posture is. So let me conclude with that, and so I know there are people around this room, and I was just talking to someone here who is involved in modern communications and I think narrative building and broadening audiences. With unbelievable respect to all of you who've stayed in this room for 2 days, we strategic analysts are not doing you a favor by being such wonks. And so we need to work together to really change the structure and the content and the appeal of this dialogue. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. So, question of narrative is quite interesting. Of course, we all try to present in the most sort of straightforward, compelling, dynamic fashion possible. Certainly over the years, it's become clear that we have a lot of work to go with that. But I think there is, broad public support more for abolition than for, say, deterrence. And I think part of our job is to show direction with that and be as compelling as sort of the manipulative language inside the system that purports that this is actually what has the consensus. Absolutely. So very intriguing things to think about today. Our next speaker is Mike Lofgren, who is a self-described refugee from the problem we are trying to expose. He worked for 28 years on Capitol Hill as a national security analyst, most of that time for the House and Senate budget committees. Since leaving the Hill in 2011, he has written 2 books on his experiences. Lofgren represents no political party, faction, ideology, or organization. His views are strictly his own, based on what he has seen. So the title of his talk today is The Merger of Corporations and the U.S. Government as an Underlying Cause of the Current Nuclear Situation.
Now for something completely different. I am not a nuclear expert. Rather, I spent my career in the political world of Capitol Hill. It was a world that gave me an abiding faith in the non-existence of mankind's wisdom. At least the wisdom of those who presume to speak not only in America's name, but in humanity's name. That is why I left the place and wrote a book about the partisan craziness that rules it. You can see it here. The party is over. Now I am in the middle of writing a book on a topic I shall discuss today, the deep state. Nuclear weapons are not just big bombs with nasty effects. They are the ultimate expression of the power of a distinctive form of American governance. When Hillary Clinton hinted at nuking Iran by saying we could obliterate it, she was revealing a distinctive attitude of our governing class. Now, where did that attitude come from? Are such people subject to democratic control? You hear similar statements from elected and appointed officials, think tank experts, and so forth. That is the typical mindset of those who have assimilated the values of the American deep state. I use the term deep state to mean an informal association of key elements of government with top-level finance and industry, and which rules the country with only limited heed to the consent of the governed, that's us, through the formal political process. During the last several years, the media have been flooded with pundits condemning the broken politics of Washington. Conventional wisdom says that the partisan gridlock and dysfunction are the new normal. We are always threatened, as we are today, with government shutdowns, and governance is on par with a banana republic. And Obama, it's very evident, is impotent as far as getting his domestic agenda through Congress. Yet despite this gridlock, President Obama can kill American citizens without due process, detain prisoners for years without charge, and conduct dragnet surveillance on Americans without a warrant. At home, this power is expressed through massive displays of force by militarized federal, state, and local police. Abroad, the president can start wars without so much as a buy or leave from Congress. And these are not isolated contradictions. They are so pervasive, they tend to be disregarded as background noise. During 2011, a year so poisonous that I left Capitol Hill, when partisan political warfare over the debt ceiling began to paralyze governance, and the Treasury was juggling accounts to avoid breaching the debt limit, the United States somehow scraped together $1 billion to overthrow Muammar Gaddafi. Nothing can go wrong there. Yes, there is another government beneath the one visible at either end of Pennsylvania Avenue, a hybrid of public and private institutions ruling the country and linked to, but only intermittently controlled by the visible state, whose leaders we nominally choose. Those who seek conspiracy theory to explain this will be disappointed. There is no secret conspiratorial cabal. Using conspiracy to explain the functioning of a complex society is like belief in intelligent design, a pseudoscience which imagines wisdom teeth, tonsils, and appendices resulted from a grand designer's infallible plan. Evidence tells us that those features arose by tiny degrees over eons as random adaptations to chance and necessity. And they are not always optimal designs. The deep state, like a set of infected tonsils, is hardly optimal, but it became ascendant over our traditional democracy as a result of historical circumstance. The deep state is not the whole government, and it's not just the military-industrial complex. It is a hybrid of national security and law enforcement, plus key parts of other government branches. The Departments of Defense, State, Homeland Security, Justice, and CIA are all components. There's also the Treasury because of its power over financial flows, enforcement of international economic sanctions, and its symbiosis with Wall Street. A lot of sanctions day-to-day execution is left to American megabanks like Citi or J.P. Morgan, in the same way that the Pentagon outsourced military logistics to contractors in Iraq. Some parts of the judiciary belong to the deep state, like the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, whose actions are mysterious even to most members of Congress. There are also key trial courts, such as the Eastern District of Virginia and the Southern District of Manhattan, where sensitive national security cases are tried. The final government component is a rump Congress of congressional leadership and some, but not all, members of the Defense and Intelligence Committees. The rest of Congress, normally so fractious and partisan, is only intermittently aware of the deep state, and when required, usually submits to a few well-chosen words from its emissaries. While all government as a whole may be attentive to the desires of all corporations, the deep state components are even more intimately linked by a web of money, mutual goals, and careerism to certain key elements of corporate America. These elements include the military-industrial complex, Wall Street, and Silicon Valley. One former NSA insider told me the spy agencies are completely dependent on Silicon Valley's technology and cooperation to perform their mission. The membrane between government and industry is highly permeable for the personnel. The Director of National Intelligence, James R. Clapper, was an executive of Booz Allen, the largest intelligence contractor. His predecessor, Admiral Mike McConnell, is now vice chairman of the same company. Booz Allen is virtually 100% dependent on government business. The Carlyle Group, a private equity firm with $189 billion in assets under management, owns the majority stake in Booz Allen's government business. Washington is the most important node of the deep state that has conquered America, but it is not the only one. Invisible threads of money connect the town to other nodes. One is Wall Street, which supplies the cash to keep the political machine operating as a diversionary puppet theater. Should the politicians forget their lines, Wall Street floods Washington with cash and lawyers to help the hired hands remember their own best interests. It is not too much to say that Wall Street may be the ultimate owner of the deep state and its strategies, if for no other reason that it has the money to reward government operatives with a second career lucrative beyond the dreams of avarice, certainly well beyond the dreams of a government salaryman as I was. The deep state's control over politics renders moot the question I raised at the beginning as to whether policy on nuclear issues or any other policy is subject to popular control. In practice, the American political system allows only two parties, both of which are wholly dependent on corporations and the wealthy. These two parties engineer electoral laws and gerrymander districts so that third-party alternatives are unelectable. It is a system that would have been familiar to the Whig oligarchs of 18th century England. Martin Gillens of Princeton and Benjamin Page of Northwestern examined 2,000 opinion surveys of public policy and correlated those preferences with outcomes. Quoting Gillens here, "The preferences of economic elites have far more impact upon policy change than the preferences of the average citizens do. Ordinary citizens have virtually no influence over what their government does in the United States," unquote. In the 2012 campaign, President Obama told a group of wealthy donors that included Microsoft moguls Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer, "You now have the potential of 200 people in this room deciding who ends up being elected president every single time." The visible state, whose doings you follow on C-SPAN, may be breaking down, but the invisible state's machinery has been steadily expanding. That is the paradox of American government. Drone strikes, data mining, secret prisons, panopticon-like surveillance of citizens' private lives on the one hand, and on the other, visible institutions of self-government declining to the status of a banana republic amid the decay of public infrastructure. The ruling structures of complex societies are not uniform. They are a coalition of dominant factions operating by an unwritten agreement that cooperation is better than open strife, and that a clash between factions' conflicting interests should be shelved, or at least hidden from public view, in favor of long-term advantage. But critiques of the separate components of the deep state tend to view them as standalone structures, rather than as cooperating factions in a larger social environment. Few have posited these separate institutions as related and synergistic components of a much larger story: the transformation of post-World War II America from a quasi-social democracy to a political oligarchy maintaining the outward form but not the spirit of constitutional government. The United States has evolved a governing structure that made possible both the rapacity of Wall Street and the culture of permanent war and constant surveillance. These superficially distinct phenomena are outgrowths of the same political culture, so they must be seen as related. The state within a state that promotes and benefits from militarism, a plutocratic boom and bust economy, and a totalized surveillance state is hidden in plain sight. Its operators pursue agendas which are hardly secret. As the political scientist Harold Lasswell observed over half a century ago, society's leadership consists of people whose, quote, private motives are displaced onto public objects and rationalized in terms of public interest, unquote. Now, all societies have an establishment, a social network committed to its own enrichment and perpetuation. But in terms of scope, financial resources, and sheer global reach, the American hybrid state is in a class by itself. Sheer quantity has a quality all its own. That said, it is neither omniscient nor invincible. Far from invincible, its failures, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, its incapacity to anticipate or respond to the greatest financial crash since the Great Depression, even its blindness to the obvious potential for a hurricane to drown New Orleans, are routine enough that only its protectiveness towards its higher-ranking personnel allows them to escape the consequences of their ineptitude. Far from brilliant conspirators, mediocre thinking and careerist hackery are what makes the system's operatives stand out. The deep state is a wasteful and incompetent method of governance which reduces economic growth and weakens true national security. But it persists because its perverse incentive structure towards failure dresses it up as success. Its pervasive corruption and creation of synthetic bogeymen anesthetize the public into a state of mind composed of apathy, cynicism, and fear, the very opposite of responsible citizenship. The deep state also invests in diversionary strategies such as scapegoating when it is necessary to externalize domestic social tensions onto convenient foreign targets. How did I come to these conclusions? As a specialist in national security, I was on the fringe of this world, if neither in it by full membership, nor of it by psychological disposition. But like everyone else, I became partly assimilated by the culture of the institution I worked for, and only slowly, before the invasion of Iraq, did I begin to question the motives of the people who are, to paraphrase George W. Bush, the deciders. Cultural assimilation is what psychologist Irving L. Janne called groupthink, the chameleon-like ability to adopt the views of one's peers and superiors. This syndrome is endemic to Washington. The town is frequently swept by fads, whether it's biennial budgeting, grand bargains, or invading countries they can barely locate on a map. As in the military, everyone gets on board, and it is not career-enhancing to question the mission. As Upton Sinclair said, it is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends upon his not understanding it. The American government, together with dependent corporations and those who make up the satellite organizations of contractors, campaign donors, and influence peddlers, constitute the most complex institution in the world. This institution has evolved into what sociologist Max Weber called the iron cage. The cage is a metaphor for the relentless pressure on actors to conform to the expectations of the organizations they work for. Weber saw that while bureaucracies are supposed to employ rational decision-making, actors within them end up behaving irrationally. Modern societies create police and courts to safeguard liberty, But institutional logic impels those agencies to violate liberty because officials insist they must do whatever it takes to keep us safe. Rules also bar nepotism, bribery, or insider trading. So an institution evolves ever more subtle practices to allow legalized corruption, such as political action committees and 501c4 charitable organizations. At bottom, societies create bureaucratic structures to solve problems. During the last 15 years, the deep state has done a horrible job of averting or overcoming crises in national security and ensuring a national economy that serves the needs of the majority, not to mention preserving their liberties. But shadow government has created a fog of soothing propaganda to ensure its own perpetuation while protecting the reputations and incomes of the senior players. It has also kept virtually every single one of them out of jail. No one above enlisted rank has served prison time for torture or other crimes associated with an unjustified war, just as no senior Wall Street executive with the mega banks landed in jail for the mortgage and securities frauds that caused the 2008 financial collapse. During 3 decades on the Hill, I watched the deep state steadily strengthen its grip on our government as it inflated threats, promoted the longest military buildup in our history, invaded the wrong country in the most egregious foreign policy blunder of my lifetime, and imposed disastrous financial deregulation that nearly wrecked the world economy. Now it seeks a second Cold War. It is with all that in mind that we must gauge the competence and the prudence of the deep state and its players with respect to our topic of mitigating the risks of nuclear war. You will never get a handle on the nuclear weapons problem unless you cure the pathology of the deep state and its actors. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Now, unfortunately, Mike can't stay for the Q&A. He has a train to catch. I know that I should have said it before, but I'm sure you can look him up and figure out how to get in touch with him if you have questions. So our third speaker for this panel is Susi Snyder. And she is the Nuclear Disarmament Program Manager at PAX in the Netherlands. She's author of Don't Bank on the Bomb, which is a report on the global financing of the nuclear weapons industry. And she's going to be talking about that today. But I also wanted to mention that Susi used to be the Secretary General of WILP, which means she used to be my boss. She actually hired me for this job, so thanks for that, Susi. And she's done a lot of cool stuff over the years. She's very impressive. She does things like sing at karaoke, which I'm not supposed to talk about, and shut down nuclear waste dumps, which I think I am allowed to talk about. So she has an impressive track record, but she's going to talk to us today about the corporations involved in nuclear weapons production.
I have to say, I think one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life was hiring Ray. Yeah, and I see other people agree, and that's really cool. I want to thanks Helen for inviting me, and thank you all for coming. This is quite exciting. I want to thank the tech crew for helping to get my PowerPoint up, which I know they will do at some point. And it's been really interesting these last couple of days, listening to a lot of these problems, a lot of the horror, the doom and gloom associated with nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons are scary. No doubt about it. I don't think anybody will disagree. Yes, Thank you. And they're things that we think about often in the abstract, that only politicians or governments can actually do anything about. And we kind of tend to feel like our role is only to influence those who create and implement policy. But I want to talk about something that you and I and every single person in this room can do about nuclear weapons. I want to talk about how we can take the power back a little bit and reject the idea that nuclear weapons are just totally disempowering. Because they are. I mean, they threaten us with destruction, fire, burning, radiation, big, scary things. But we can do something. So today, I'm going to talk about what we can do. Because we can act to stigmatize nuclear weapons. By stigmatizing them, we will help to outlaw them and eliminate them. And the stigma is so important. We know that they are bad. But bad isn't good enough. They are unacceptable in our human society. And by following the money, and that's what we do with our report, we track down the money. By following the money, we can cut off the money for nuclear weapons. We can, and it's not the only thing we need to do to outlaw and eliminate them, but it's something that every single one of us here can do, and I hope will do today. And we do it because the 9 nuclear-armed states are planning to spend more than $1 trillion over the next decade to maintain and modernize their arsenals. Hey. So, the majority of that money comes from taxpayers in the nuclear-armed countries, but don't bank on the bomb, which is this report I'm talking about, shows that 411 banks, pension funds, asset managers, financial institutions in 31 countries, they have also invested, and they've invested $402 billion in 28 companies that are involved in the production of nuclear weapons. Now, our research, we focus on the nuclear arsenals in France, India, the UK, and the US. And we do that simply because the arsenals in other countries are quite, they're operated and maintained by government agencies and don't have external investment. So it's just a limitation that way. I figure I'll be straight up from the beginning. But a wide range of financial institutions operate in our world. And there are things like privately owned companies, state-owned institutions, banks, insurance companies, investment funds, investment banks, pension funds, export credit agencies. There's a lot of institutions that fit in this financial institution category. For ease of reference, I'll just call them banks, because they're a lot more than banks, but banks is easier to say. And a lot of corporations in the world rely on financial markets and these institutions to provide them with operating capital. They play a significant role in every aspect of human activity. And in choosing what companies and projects they finance and invest in, financial institutions play a significant role in our world. And they choose to avoid investments in controversial items, like tobacco, like nuclear weapons. So with each update of this report, we first look at what companies are involved. And there was a question on this earlier, so let's talk a little bit about the producers. These companies are mostly located in nuclear-armed countries, but not all of them. Finmeccanica is an Italian company. Airbus is Dutch. A lot of them are. Tyson Group is a German company. But they're mostly in nuclear-armed countries. And we identified 28 of them. And I know that you've heard about Lockheed Martin. I know that you've heard about Raytheon. But you may not know that Boeing and Airbus also have a role to play when it comes to the production and maintenance of nuclear weapons. Now, these companies provide key components to develop, test, maintain, and modernize nuclear arsenals. The contracts that these companies have with nuclear-armed countries are for materials and services to keep nuclear weapons alive and ready in those arsenals, the modernization that Hans was talking about earlier. And in other countries like Russia, China, Pakistan, and North Korea, as I said earlier, the maintenance and modernization is done primarily by government agencies. And of course, our report, as I said before, we follow the money. So we look at where are the investors, who's investing. We call this section of the report the Hall of Shame. I think it's appropriate. And this is where we show these 411 institutions. Now, I brought a couple of copies, not too many, of our executive summary. So some of you may have this. If you flip it open, we show the table. We show who actually does the investment. You can also go online and look at don'tbankonthebomb.com and see the list of investors, handily sorted for you by country and alphabetically. And we list the parent companies. So it's a really important thing to keep in mind because, for example, you look for, oh, is there anybody in Austria? And you won't find Bank of Austria because Bank of Austria is a subsidiary of UniCredit. But UniCredit is in there. And so this is tricky. On your bank's website, it has at the bottom a subsidiary of blah, 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 or so-and-so is the parent company. Your pension fund does the same. It's very easy to check this, but because of the sheer number of financial institutions operating in the world, we only list the parent companies. And most of them are in the US. In fact, 239 of them are here in the US, more than half. And the top 3 investors, State Street, Capital Group, and you may have heard of BlackRock. They're quite high up on this list. Together, they've invested more than 80 billion US dollars. And I don't think anyone here will really be surprised that JP Morgan Chase is an investor. But let me ask you this. Did you know that Blue Cross and Blue Shield also has investments in nuclear weapon producers? I see by your faces you didn't. They actually have 8 million invested in these companies. That is not a lot of money, and it's easy to get them to change. They probably don't even know. But if you are a Blue Cross Blue Shield client, you can tell them. It works. State Street, as I said, is the biggest investor we've identified, over 28 billion. But State Farm is there too. And State Farm has 252 million invested. TIAA-CREF, which I believe is the Teachers Pension Fund, they have more than 3 billion invested in nuclear weapon producers. TIAA-CREF. The New Jersey Department of the Treasury. New Jersey Department of the Treasury holds the pensions for firefighters and cops across the river. They have 119 million invested in nuclear weapon producers. It's quite a lot, but probably most of them don't even know. They're like, oh, we're invested in Boeing. Boeing makes airplanes. Good investment. Airbus makes airplanes. No problem. And when they find out, what we have learned in doing this report, when they're reached out to by clients, they back off. They say, what? Wait, no. When the media contacts them to get a comment, they say, oh, no, of course not. We don't invest in nuclear weapon producers. We don't want to have anything to do with nuclear weapons. And so we talk to them some more, and we get them to put in a policy. And that takes me to my favorite part of this report, the good guys. Because some institutions already divest. They have really clear and explicit policies that make no exceptions for any type of nuclear weapon or crucial component, any type of activity by nuclear weapon producers, any type of financing. So they apply it to all of their products. In our Hall of Fame and our runners-up sections of this report, we profile 33 financial institutions with policies that prohibit or limit their investments in companies associated with nuclear weapons. Hall of Fame absolutely are the best. We have 8 of them. These are comprehensive in scope and application. They're right now the ones that we have identified because we only know about them when people tell us about them. We can't contact every financial institution in the world. That's a little bit much. But when we hear about a policy or a potential policy, we investigate. We're on it. Tell us if you find out. The ones that we have are in Italy, the Netherlands, Norway, and Sweden. And it's a mix of ethical banks, government-managed, and private institutions. I'm happy to say that my bank's in there. I moved to a different bank. But we want to show, by producing this list, that it is possible and that these institutions can and do make these decisions. And we double check, and we're scrupulous. Like, we kicked somebody off this year because we found out that they had a small investment, like a very, very small stock holding in Leidos. And we said, oh, sorry, you guys, we have to kick you off our list. They're like, no, 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 we'll sell it, we'll sell it. We're like, yeah, but at our time of investigation, you show up on our list. Sorry, you're out. They've since sold that stock, very happily. In the runners-up category, we show another 27 financial institutions. Now, these are a mix. They have a policy. Some of them are a really good policy, but they still have a tiny little investment. Some are a really lousy policy, like they won't invest in any nuclear weapon-associated country operating in, North Korea. Like, that's not really, much of a policy. But we do give them some credit for at least trying and recognizing nuclear weapons are not something their clients want to be associated with, because it's your money at the end of the day. And we have the most conversations with these institutions in this runners-up category, and it is amazing. They contact us and ask us, how do we get into the Hall of Fame? How do we disassociate from the stigma of nuclear weapons? And we're always looking for more. So we've already started our process for the 2015 update of this report. It'll be out in November. It's a long, exhaustive research process. And we'll be looking into another 20 or 30 financial institutions. In fact, we came across, helpfully, by some financial institutions. They said, hey, we noticed that our buddies are not in your list. What about these guys? We want more people on the list. More people want to be the good guys. Nobody wants to be a bad guy. And it's building up these policies is where we can have like a systemic impact. And it's where you can help. We found public pressure can change the policy of financial institutions and encourage the development of policies that prohibit any association with nuclear weapons. Simply alerting clients of a financial institution can make a change happen. A spontaneous campaign erupted in Sweden because of a newspaper article. People were like, my bank is investing in nuclear weapons? No, 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 and started posting on that bank's Facebook site. A couple of people in the bank said, ooh, this does not look good for us. We better get a policy going, and they did. We came back and said, hey, your policy, it's okay, it's not great. It could be a little bit better, and you still have investments. Ran some more stories in the media. The bank said, oh, what do we need to do? And now they're fixing it, and they're doing public statements explaining exactly why they are divesting. They do it because a few people, a handful of people, 3, 4 people, posted on their Facebook site. You can make a difference. You can take the money out of nuclear weapons. Every single one of you, and that's something that feels good. It feels like I like doing things. Doing stuff is good. So, and it works. Divestment works. Now, it's unlikely that divestment from one financial institution will create enough pressure for a company to end its involvement with nuclear weapons work. Even a few institutions might not do it. But it can have some influence. And exclusions by financial institutions can have a stigmatizing effect. And it can convince directors to decide to reduce their reliance on nuclear weapons contracts and expand into other areas. So we have a sister campaign at POX called Stop Explosive Investments. I want to tell you a happy little story from our sister campaign. There, the focus is on disinvestment from cluster munitions producers. Now, granted, cluster munitions, unlike nuclear weapons, have been clearly outlawed through a specific international treaty, but not every country in the world has signed up to that treaty, and not every country, not every company has stopped producing cluster bombs. But the divestment campaign had a specific and significant effect. Because everyone in here knows about Lockheed Martin, right? Does anyone here think that Lockheed Martin would stop producing weapons? Anybody? No? They did. And they explained that they hope their cessation of the activities in the area of cluster munitions would enable their removal from prohibited investment firms and allow investors to consider Lockheed Martin for inclusion in their portfolios. Divestment changed the production stream from Lockheed Martin. Divestment is a tool, it's a powerful tool that we have. And it shows that pressure from the financial world has an impact. Financial institutions told us they've been talking to Lockheed Martin, they've been pushing on Lockheed Martin. And Lockheed Martin came to them and said, we want your money. What do we need to do to get it? Stop making cluster bombs, some of these banks said. Lockheed Martin said, all right. It took some time, it took some work, but it got there. 3 other producers have said that they are no longer involved in the production of cluster munitions because of pressure from the financial industry. And that's power that we have, and that's power that started because clients demanded their banks don't invest in unacceptable weapons. And it shows how you and I can do something. We actually have power here. So let me tell you what we can do. Oh, I forgot I have slides. All right, now, that's just the last slide. All right, first, step 1, find out if your bank is investing. This is the website, don'tbankonthebomb.com. Use the report, check out the lists, find out if your bank is there. Check the website of your bank, are they a subsidiary? Step 2, contact the bank. Who here has online banking on their phone? A couple of people. Okay, so you want to get your phone out now? No, I'm not kidding. Get your phone out now. Go to your online bank, there's a feedback form or a request for more information. Ask your bank, are you invested in companies associated with nuclear weapons? Just ask them. It puts the fear of stigma into them. It is amazing. The question alone is power. So contact the bank. And you contact the bank through your phone, and I see people with their phones out, and please do contact your bank right now. Send them a note. And then try to climb, it's always good to climb as high as you can. So, if you know somebody on the board of directors of a financial institution, talk to them. It's a simple thing, but talk to your friends, right? We get far when we talk to our friends. If you get somebody on the board of a financial institution to engage with you and interested with you, most of the time that does it. That's it. If they're interested, if they're like, ooh, nuclear weapons, we don't do that, do we? Oh, we do? Oh, that's not good. You're halfway there. You're more than halfway there. Policy is easy to write from that point. And no matter where you go, whatever way you contact your bank, don't forget to contact your bank. Now, sometimes they come back to you and they say things like, nuclear weapons aren't illegal. It's okay. Nuclear weapons are fine. And I'll tell you what, pornography isn't illegal either, but I don't want my money invested in it. All right? You have a choice on where your money goes. And once you talk to your bank, you can always consider the next step. I call step 3, go public. Even the threat of going public with a campaign against a bank is enough to push them into developing a policy. Just the threat, saying, ooh, we've got 25 students and they're gonna set up a protest and picket in front of your bank on the 17th, unless you put in a policy. How about that? And you know what? At Commerzbank in Germany, they said, oh, okay, we don't want that. That's not going to look very good. We're a people's bank. It's against our current ad campaign. Yeah, we'll put in a policy. Hey, power of, we still carried out the actions because the policy wasn't very good. But they did put in a policy, and now we can work with them. We have a dialogue, and that's really important. ABP, a Dutch pension fund, was forced to change. And let me tell you how. We talked to Dutch pension funds, we're a Dutch organization, but we didn't really do a whole lot of campaigning on ABP. We thought they were a bit of a lost cause. But a Dutch TV program covered the report and covered ethical investments and did a show on ethical investments and then did an update. Ooh, this is the new report. How come ABP is still here? And ABP told the TV program the year before they were going to get out of investments. but they didn't. So the TV program ran a poll of ABP clients saying, do you want ABP, your pension, invested in nuclear weapon producers? And the poll came back with 87% saying no. So they put, the TV guys put the pension fund on the spot. We didn't really have to do anything, we had to do the research. And they took it and made it their own, because it's a new way to come at this issue. And it's a stigmatizing effect. And that's important, because nuclear weapons are horrible, and they're unacceptable. And this is a way to show that. So, divestment's not the only step that we have to take on our way to get rid of nuclear weapons, to outlaw and eliminate them. But it really is important, and it's something that every single one can do. Coordinated global efforts can put a halt to modernization, they can slow it down, they can pull the money out, they can strengthen the norm against nuclear weapons, and they can build the momentum, demonstrating whole of society support for a nuclear weapon-free world. Whole of society opposition to the legitimacy of nuclear weapons, because they are illegitimate. And if it's an illegitimate weapon, I don't want my pension invested in it, I don't want my bank invested in it. I'll leave you with one more anecdote. We have on our Hall of Fame, we have a bank called ASN, right? Oops. It's the one with the little squirrel logo. Now, ASN Bank, loud. ASN Bank, we were like, oh, they've been a good guy. It's not a very big bank, but they have an amazing policy. And we said, well, you know, we're kind of running this campaign nationally to get a national law to outlaw nuclear weapons in the Netherlands. Maybe ASN would help us. So we asked them. They said yes. So now on the login page for ASN Bank, when you go to do your e-banking, you get an option to click onto our petition to outlaw nuclear weapons in the Netherlands. All right? They want to be the good guys. So I'll leave you with that thought. You know, nuclear weapons are unacceptable. Nobody wants to be associated with them. And we all have the power to do something, the power of our purse. So let's use it and go from there. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Susi. Okay, our team is going around collecting questions. I just wanted to say that the divestment work can also be really fun when it comes to protests. I remember there was one time that Tim dressed as a bomb and walked into some Australian firm that had investments in nuclear weapons. This is a video that's online, so after you see Tim speak this afternoon, you can go watch him waddling around dressed as a giant bomb, which is great. So while we're still collecting questions, I'll just start with one for you, Susi, that I was thinking about when you were talking about the Cluster Munitions Convention and how they've had success with divestment there. I remember when we first started divestment work, one of the responses that we'd sometimes get from financial institutions was, well, yes, we've divested from cluster munitions producing companies because cluster munitions are illegal. Nuclear weapons are not illegal. So I'm wondering if this is still an argument that you're hearing these days.
Well, actually, yeah, we hear it sometimes, but primarily from BNP Paribas in France. They come back with this a lot, and they're quite a big financial institution. From smaller banks, and pension funds primarily. Pension funds get it. Pension funds are kind of cool, and pension funds are easy targets for us as campaigners because they want to make their clients happy. I don't know why, it's kind of cool. But we don't get they're not illegal as much. And when we do, we come back and say it doesn't matter. It's not a question of legality, it's a question of acceptability. And as I said before, you know, pornography is not illegal, but I don't want my pension invested in it. You know, tobacco is not illegal, but my pension has divested from tobacco producers. You know, there are things that are, you know, ethical standards. And in this, currently we have a great global effort on corporate social responsibility. And this fits very well in with those principles of responsible investment. and in that CSR movement. And I have to say, I'm really proud to be associated with people working on divestment from fossil fuels. That's showing that it works, and it does. So it's a, like I said, it's a tool we have. Thanks.
Thanks, Susi. So for Jan, the first question is, have the so-called Four Horsemen made any more recent comments or actions regarding, say, nuclear weapon modernization, or the humanitarian impact process that's been going on, or the Marshall Islands lawsuit, or anything like that, any sort of newer developments in recent years?
Actually, on the contrary, they have toned down considerably in the last few years their call to action. It's so the rhetorical embrace of the elimination of nuclear weapons in 2007 has progressively over time become more modest, and some of the key components of an overall strategy of denuclearization or de-emphasis of nuclear weapons, including the comprehensive test ban, and the comprehensive test ban, which is very crucial to a de-emphasis on modernization of the ability to develop and modernize nuclear weapons around the world, and the fissile material cutoff ban, things like that. If anything, they, and a couple of members in particular, have become less willing to talk, to push for change. It's the zeitgeist, right? So they were, in the beginning, in 2007, the ability of those four people to speak out and embrace the vision represented the correlation of forces at the time. That said, and to our second speaker, who is not here, it's very interesting that if you can imagine that if even former secretaries of state and very senior senators feel social pressure to de-emphasize opinions that are seen to be too extreme or out of the mainstream, that it just is a tiny glimpse into the kind of pressure that does come to stay within the boundaries of discourse, even for extremely senior and retired former Secretary of Defense, former Secretary of State. So those are the kinds of things that I think that our second speaker partly was alluding to. Of the, I just read a book called The Tyranny of Consensus, which is about the pressures on people trying to, quote, stay credible in debates like this one.
Okay, thank you. Back to Susi. We have a question asking if you've targeted very large state and city pension funds from, say, New York State or New York City or California, and if you've had any success with those types of pension funds.
Okay, it's a great question. I don't live in this country, so I don't tend to focus on the financial institutions here. I'm not going to lie to you. I focus where I live. I encourage people to do that. We've done quite a lot with the Norwegian Government Pension Fund Global, which is the biggest pension fund in the world in terms of net assets. They're really rich on that Norwegian oil money, and it's quite wealthy. And we've gotten some progress over there. They set a standard for a lot of other financial institutions. I would very much like to speak to people here about targeting the New Jersey fund in particular, because the New Jersey fund is something, it doesn't have a big investment. It's something that no first responder, I could imagine, would want to deal with the consequences of any use of nuclear weapons. What first responder? No, nobody wants to do that. And why invest in the companies that make that use possible? And I think that, I think it's really worthwhile. I'd be really happy to talk to folks in the area here about how we can get, I think, a couple of cops and firefighters together to say a few things might be really effective. And I'm here all day, folks. So let's make that happen. I think it's completely doable, and it's a great win, and it's a great win for the tri-state area.
Great, thanks, Susi. Okay, so Jan, there's a couple questions here that are in the same stream, thinking about nuclear deterrence. that, as you said, it's indisputable to so many people, and it seems like an insurmountable barrier sometimes when trying to talk about abolition or disarmament. So people are looking for suggestions on how to deflate deterrence's so-called apparent logic, and wondering how did the narrative become so popular in the first place as well.
I think the post-Cold War quest for some kind of umbrella doctrine that even begins to appeal the way that deterrence or containment managed to do, which could cover a multitude of sins as well as virtues. There's been no successful crafting of the narrative or the bumper sticker for what an United States engaged globally in a responsible way. There are too many words. It doesn't work. Containment was great because it sounds, you could do a lot of things under containment. It was everything from diplomacy to the extreme use of force and covert operations, etc. It all fit under that rubric. So it is true, and I've listened to Susi, I realize I work with people who believe that nuclear weapons prevent war, who believe that nuclear weapons are highly stabilizing, and who believe that it is absolutely essential for the United States to always have a larger number of nuclear weapons relative to all other countries, because anything less than that is going to be hazardous to security. So there is a big conceptual architecture and political reality there that needs to be dealt with. So your question was, what do you do about it? One of the things I find really intriguing is how the United States has responded to the development of nuclear weapons in smaller states, including North Korea, including the prospective development of nuclear infrastructure in Iran. Even though we argued throughout the Cold War about tens of thousands of weapons and having to be essential in order to maintain parity or superiority with the Soviet Union, the minute that there was reports that there might be one or two crude devices in Iraq, I'm going to get to the point, I swear, prior to Desert Storm, the argumentation was that had we known that there actually were nuclear weapons in Iraq, that could have prevented the assembly of a coalition to go in to punish Iraq for invading Kuwait. So if that's true, then the one or two weapons, suddenly the whole logic of deterrence kind of sort of falls apart, because we used to worry about whether we had 11,000 or 1050 or, even at the lower numbers, we were talking about 4,500, which is really much larger because there were reserve forces. So in talking about, we really do worry about the single or couple of nuclear weapons because we worry about use. And it's part of the conceit of the superpower that our weapons are not for use because we are very responsible, and the more weapons we have, the less likelihood, etc. When you actually look at the legacy of deterrence, it is rife with all kinds of near misses, all kinds of potential accidents, all kinds of averted catastrophes, about which Eric Schlosser has written a very accessible book, Command and Control, based on years and years of research that was done, including at the Brookings Institution when I was there, about how close we came, not just in the Cuban Missile Crisis, but many other times, to major nuclear catastrophe. That's the lesson that we should be imparting from the nuclear legacy of the Cold War. And we are really bad at that. We tend to instead impute huge status and power to countries that are developing nuclear weapons instead of trying to educate them about the problems that we ourselves face. Sorry, that was a very long answer to a short question.
No, that's fine. I'm sure it's useful. There was a question that was for me about the comment I made after your presentation about there being support for nuclear disarmament more than deterrence in terms of public opinion. So what I meant there was sort of consistently across global public opinion polls that we've done, there's been a consistent support for nuclear disarmament across a range of countries. So that was just to clarify what I meant by that. Next one for Susi is, I'm so encouraged to see so many colleges and universities involved with fossil fuel divestment. Can you speak on getting educational institutions on board with your Don't Bank on the Bomb campaign?
Okay, yes, a little bit. Right now, our biggest target for Don't Bank on the Bomb this year is in the UK. And I'll tell you why, because UK is making a decision about Trident renewal. And they're slated to make that decision early next year. So we're talking to those who are campaigning so successfully around fossil fuel divestment, who have now really built the skills and energy and enthusiasm to take issues of social responsibility as far as they can, to use Don't Bank on the Bomb as the next big thing. And we've gotten such great responses and really appreciate the energy that's coming out of that, because, you know, once you get your institution to divest from fossil fuels, well, you want to ride the wave of winning, right? It feels good. And so we're trying to build that spirit up, and so now we're talking to 16 groups across the UK to pick this up further. Here in the US, we know that it's picking up as well, and 350.org has done amazing work in the climate, on climate action and on these global efforts. So we've talked to them a bit about picking things up here in the US, but not as extensively. And that's because for us, it's a strategic decision. We don't want a new Trident system to be bought by the UK. And we think we can make an impact there. So we're not a lot of people. It's me and another guy who work on this, pretty much along with a lot of other responsibilities. So we're trying to maximize our impact. And we're really grateful to the folks in the UK who have taken up this issue, and I know some of them are watching. Hey guys, and we're really enthused by looking at future opportunities. Hopefully, here in the US, we can pick that up further, and it's again building on success. People want to win. People want to do things that make them feel good, and that's just human nature. And nobody wants to be a bad guy. I think that's pretty much shared wherever we are.
I would agree with that. Okay, Jen, this one's from Helen. What changed the zeitgeist? She asks.
What changed the zeitgeist? The deep state. I mean, I don't put things that way, but the fact is, a lot of things changed the zeitgeist. They were external and internal. I tend to pay attention to the internal and domestic politics of the management of these issues. I don't think there was very much effort put into how you would actually operationalize a strategy that gets you to zero. There was almost no debate at all about the actual practical steps, and why, most importantly perhaps, in seizing the high ground, why it was an investment in national security to do so. So it was very quick and easy for critics to seize the notion of zero or elimination and make fun of it, which I have watched now 3 times in my lifetime happen. So there is a problem with the narrative. It's, the elimination of nuclear weapons sounds to many as an extremely naive, impossible feat. So, but instead of talking about how there are many states of zero you could maintain, there are all kinds of ways to do this, were conversations that were going on in Cambridge, Palo Alto, and maybe Melbourne. They weren't happening and didn't happen in Washington, where the extreme partisanship of the nuclear debate seized immediately on something as modest as the START treaty. And it took everything that everybody had to actually get the START treaty ratified, which included a bipartisan set of votes in the Senate, and it really eclipsed the whole debate. And by the way, Russia has not helped at all in terms of zeitgeist issues. Does that answer your question, Helen?
You can.
How do they make fun of it?
It's
The question was, how do they make fun of it?
And Helen, you're not supposed to shout questions from the audience.
Yeah, that's why I just repeated. I can't stop her though. It's her symposium.
No,
I don't know what to do.
It's her party. I think she's allowed to do whatever she wants. It's up to the moderator.
Yeah.
The notion is that, I mean, you've heard all the arguments. That how could you possibly ever get to zero? Any country that cheated, anyone could cheat, you could disguise. All those arguments, which have to do with procedure, they have to do with process, basically, though, still come down to the logic that nuclear weapons empower you, and therefore the possession of even a handful gives you an advantage over others that could not possibly be countered or replicated. And that can be really flawed logic. It's not actually accurate. But it's because there wasn't an effort to make this a practical strategy and to work, and I would include, I mean, I think any president who's going to actually embrace this as an operational strategy needs to precede formal public announcements with major coalition building on the inside, where you basically separate, even if you continue a policy of deterrence, you separate deterrence from warfighting. If you separate the deterrence function from prompt counterforce, the numbers fall rapidly, and there is a way to do this. But there's going to be a lot of eggs broken, and it requires a lot of skill. And it's something that I actually would imagine the first George Bush being rather capable of having done, given the style of leadership that he exerted, plus his subordinates who were extremely powerful.
Okay, thank you.
Very powerful.
Yep.
Skilled.
Okay. So my next question for Susi is slightly off topic from your presentation, but I'm going to allow it because I know it's another subject that's very close to your heart and work these days. So wondering if you could comment further on U.S. nuclear weapons in the Netherlands.
Ooh, yeah. Okay, so there's 20 of them, but it's a public secret. So, technically we cannot confirm or deny whether they're there. That's the Dutch government line. And so I can't confirm or deny that they're at a base called Vocal. I can't confirm or deny that Vocal is right next to the town of Uden, which has a very lovely mayor who drinks milk with his lunch. But I can't confirm or deny these things. They continue to be there. The Dutch Parliament has issued a number of consensus resolutions saying things like the new Joint Strike Fighters, the F-35s that we're buying, and they're so expensive. Oh. So these new planes, these awesome, do everything planes, the Dutch Parliament said we should not pay for them to be capable of dropping nuclear weapons, which I think is pretty reasonable. Dutch Parliament is pretty strong on this. Dutch Parliament has also instructed the Dutch government to tell the United States that we no longer require their nuclear weapons for our security. Thank you very much. That was, again, another consensus motion, and the government came back and said, yes, we told them. They said they told them, We checked with the ambassador in Washington, it was said. But in terms of policy application, it doesn't get followed up on. And what's really unfortunate is because it was mentioned earlier, these are B-61 bombs. They're being modernized with new capabilities. And this is extremely problematic because a new capability is a new weapon. And our parliament, again, said no new nuclear weapons in the Netherlands. What's great is that they have to leave to be modernized. And so we're hoping that they never come back. The thing is, though, there are weapons and there's capability to store weapons at bunkers around quite a few NATO countries. So it's not just in the Netherlands, they're also in Germany, and the Germans do not like them. But the last German government was a lot stronger than this German government on that issue. They're in Belgium. The Belgian government is unfortunately not very strong on this issue at the moment. And they're in Italy, and the Italian foreign minister, who was amazing on this issue, got promoted out of power into the EU, which is a little bit sad for us. So it's an issue. It's that is being talked about about a bit inside NATO. It's talked about a bit here in terms of the modernization. And for us, even though it's a public secret, we're publicly saying we don't want them and secretly planning on never letting them back in once they leave.
All right, that sounds like a plan. Okay, so Jan, some people were intrigued by the title of your talk and are wondering if you could explain a little bit about the hooligans at the gate.
Well, to be honest, I didn't give my talk, so because I thought you had heard some of it. I was going to contrast the difference between arms control and disarmament, and the important thing about the hooligans part is that it doesn't seem to matter which side of the discussion one falls on, and often in talking about nuclear weapons, that they capture somehow the core values of individuals. Nuclear weapons is the whole issue of nuclear weapons and also strategic defense tend to be reflective of the core values of people in a, maybe not unique, but in a way that I've studied very carefully. So, honestly, I gave that title because Helen was demanding something really colorful, and I'm not very colorful normally, and she had given me a title that was like the sociopathology of the brutality of the blood-sucking, whatever. So I just changed it slightly. But just on the point of, there's a lot of, even in very antiseptic discussions of nuclear weapons, like people, for example, say, well, I wouldn't feel comfortable if the United States had fewer than 2,500 strategic weapons. If you tell me what your number is, I can probably tell you what your social values are. You tell me 0 and so forth, and it's the same with strategic defense. So there is an emotionalism to this discussion and a lot of ideology that reflect interesting core values that have really nothing to do with the pragmatic politics or definitely the operational military and security questions associated with them. But in the end, it really was just to please Helen that I called it Hooligans at the Gate.
It's a good enough answer. I let her talk from the floor, so she does get away with it.
She's out of control.
Okay, Susi, back on the banks. What degree of bank investment goes across international borders to invest in the nuclear industry? So there's an example here that the Royal Bank of Canada invests in uranium mining in Wyoming, and wondering if sort of this cross-border investment is done for the benefit of the investor, or if it's to cushion the industry from lawsuits and things like that.
Generally, investments are done to make money, right? That's why people invest in stuff. And Royal Bank of Canada also invests in a number of nuclear weapon producers, Canadians, and they invest outside of their national borders all the time. We have financial institutions from 31 countries investing in producers from 7. So it's part of the transnational trade. And they do it, I'd say, not so much to avoid, what was it? Avoid, what did you say?
Lawsuits.
Yeah, it's not so much to avoid lawsuits, it's to make money. That's why you invest in stuff, right? There are alternative investments, and I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. It's not just don't do something, it's do something else. And one of my favorites is you get a 3 times better return investing in Anheuser-Busch, which we all know makes not the best beer, but you get 3 times better return investing in Anheuser-Busch than you do investing in Lockheed Martin. So do you want a 1.7% return, or do you want a 4.9% return? I'll go for beer.
Okay, no comment on that.
Nothing to do with karaoke, right?
We have someone wondering, Jan, what happened to General Lee Butler, who was a straight talker about the insanity of nuclear weapons?
That's a great question. Those of you who may not know, he was the commander-in-chief of the Strategic Air Command, that, as it shifted over to now, it was known as Strategic Command, STRATCOM. And in the course, and as such, was deeply involved in the complete retooling of the nuclear targeting plans on which deterrence rests. And that experience, he retired from the Air Force after that experience, and then he served on a couple of commissions, including the Canberra Commission, which met for 2 years and urged the elimination of nuclear weapons. And from that, he came back to Washington and he gave speeches about how he had come to the conclusion, as a nuclear warrior and someone who was deeply steeped in every detail of nuclear operations, had come to the conclusion that the greatest investment we could make for security was to eliminate nuclear weapons globally. And what happened to him is that he was ostracized. He was, as many people who dissent in that way, was completely cut off from his lifelong colleagues in the Air Force. He was treated as and he himself anticipated this, actually. I was there when he gave his first speech to the Council on Foreign Relations, and he paraphrased Flannery O'Connor, who said, "Speak the truth, and the truth shall make you weird." And I think he is living in Omaha. I think he has done productive things, but he's not been back in the policy debate for quite some years.
Okay. I think a lot of us can identify with that and being weird. Susi, you wanted to add something?
Just a quick thing. He actually sent a video message to the Vienna conference, to the Civil Society Forum that was organized by ICANN in advance. But it was talking about the morality and that angle, more than the associated security question. So my sense was that that from this message, he was more, he recognized this kind of, I don't know how to say it. He felt weird talking about the security thing, but he talked about the morality of weapons, the unacceptability of weapons, and this humanitarian initiative to focus on that angle. So he may not be active. He's also got a bit old, you know, as people do, but he's definitely connected again, at least a little bit, which is great.
So I just to finish that out. Again, it's part of the sobering nature of this discussion that the fallout, if you will, from his embracing of the vision of the elimination of nuclear weapons, which, by the way, is already American policy and all policy under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. But anyway, it is very outre for a senior Air Force officer who has been head of STRATCOM to say such a thing. But it is very sobering that in part of the effect of his articulation of this view, people said he doesn't know what he's talking about. I mean, it really is I study dissent and acts of dissent and what works and what doesn't and what happens, and it really was an extraordinary story.
Okay, it's almost time to break for lunch, but I'm just gonna let one more question in because I think it's a really important one and one that hasn't really come up at all at this conference yet. And I think, you know, it could be for either of you, both of you. Do individual attitudes towards nuclear weapons have anything to do with concepts of their own masculinity and insecurity?
Touching that.
Susi, no? Jan, come on.
I don't. I think that question goes to Helen.
I think the question came from Helen, actually.
I would say yes. Yes, they do. And you can see it also how it's come up and talked about, at least in the margins here, boys and their toys, this kind of language. There is the way we use power and the way power is associated with the weapons. It definitely plays a big part in how we associate these. They're part of the big boys club. And so on. It's beyond language. It's the culturalization of these stereotypes, but it's significant, and it's an important thing that will thankfully has a lot to say on. Right.
I'm going to say something that it's just not popular at all, but in defense of my male colleagues, who I like very much, and you know, if Hans Christensen were here, I would want to defend him immediately as great examples of progressive thinkers. But I also think, so to part company with Helen, anyone who thinks that women are natural peacemakers has never been anywhere near a girls' dorm. Anyone who thinks that women are natural peacemakers has never been anywhere near a girls' dorm. They should be careful.
Yep. Do you want to? Yeah.
Susie?
I would agree with you, and I'm not talking about the biological factor of male and female. I'm talking about the gendered aspects. It's not about sex. It's about gender. And so to associate any sex with peace or not peace, that's not the question. It's how we have identified these roles in society and the associations we make with these roles in society. To say when you talk about killing 100 billion versus killing only 1 billion. I raised this question and felt like a woman. That's a gendered association, and it's not about sex. So I agree. There are great men working on great issues. There are great women working on great issues, and there are people who are working to perpetuate nuclear weapons who have whatever sex they were born with. It's not about that. So I wanted to jump in and make that clarification, because for me it's a really important distinction. And I like Hans too. He's awesome.
Absolutely. Well, I don't really have too much to add to that, Susie, so thank you. But would agree with that assessment. So, thank you, everybody. We're going to break for lunch now, and we will